Have your family or friends ever told you that they don't believe in the Bible, that it's just a myth? The Bible tells us in Psalms 85 verse 11, "Truth shall spring out of the earth." And now it has. RealDiscoveries.com presents amazing hard evidence concerning the stories of the Bible. For generations, the Holy Land has kept its secrets hidden. Secrets which strongly support the Bible's account of history. The Real Discoveries team dig deep in search of the truth behind the people and places described in biblical stories and unearth some truly breathtaking findings. Real people, real places, RealDiscoveries.com. In Genesis 18 verse 20, the Bible tells of two cities named Sodom and Gomorrah.
Then the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not,
Sodom and Gomorrah,
I will know."
beside the Dead Sea, which became so evil that God rained down burning sulfur upon them. The two cities were completely annihilated. Simon and a group of skeptics traveled to the Dead Sea in Israel to search for the remains of Sodom and Gomorrah. What they found left them speechless. Shapes resembling ziggurats, sphinxes, and strange buildings lay amid a wasteland of ash and sulfur.
Ziggurats, sphinxes,
Journey with the Real Discoveries team to the destroyed cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and see for yourself the evidence that they truly were incinerated by God.
brimstone, bigger than any that Simon had found. Filled with excitement, everyone began looking under bushes. Suddenly, it was everywhere, like strawberry picking, bigger and bigger samples. "66 samples were collected in all that day. Fired into the wall at a phenomenal velocity, the sphere burning at a ferocious heat had melted the wall around it, creating a brown husk before it was extinguished, starved of oxygen.
Join the team as they take these deadly sulfuric missiles to be tested in the laboratory and witness for yourself the jaw-dropping results.
Back in the UK, Simon, Emma, and Einar began the long job of evaluating what they had found at the Intertech Sunbury Technology Center. An X-ray fluorescent technician was to supervise an analysis of the brimstone samples. In order to provide a sample good enough for the precision of the X-ray fluorescent spectrometer to read, Andy had to be very thorough in his preparation. In short, Simon's brimstone samples were to be analyzed. Then the same tests would be conducted on sulfur flowers that had been chemically refined by laboratory methods. What was happening was difficult to grasp.
But if you're finding it actually sort of embedded in walls and things like that,
to cut them out with the walls.
right? No.
Yeah, my husband spent an hour cutting out
Right.
one out of actual rock where it was just so embedded in the rock that you couldn't actually pull it out.
Right.
I've got a prize specimen at home. It's about the size of my fist.
Right.
And I cut it right out the rock, and I stood in the rock, left it in there, where it's come down,
Right.
and embedded itself
Right.
It may have burned for some time and then...
Yes. Yeah, because the outside probably would be very hot and therefore it would
Yeah.
burn then. Yes. No, I haven't seen anything like that.
Hi, good evening. Welcome to another live program, Revelation TV. Tonight's program is all about the search for Sodom and Gomorrah. I've got a couple in the studio tonight who went out in search of Sodom and Gomorrah, and I'll introduce you to them in a second. Arrange for it to be done.
See them burn one of the balls of sulfur sent down from the heavens to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah.
Same sulfur.
Revelation what?
Revelation 21, verse 7.
Okay.
It's mentioned there. The same sulfur that came down on these evil cities, we're told that they will come down again in the future.
Revelation 21?
Revelation 21, verse 7.
7. He who overcomes will inherit these things.
That's it.
Okay.
Carry on through then.
Okay,
you'll see.
but the cowardly and the unbelieving and the abominable and the murderers and the immoral persons and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars, their part will be in the lake that burns with fire and brimstone. And this is the second death.
That's correct.
So here we're looking at the lighting of one of these sulfur balls, which was found way back. Well, it was originally landed somewhat 3,500, 4,000 years ago. Was that the timing?
About 3,900 years ago.
Or 3,900 to be
Yes,
precise.
that's
to the
roughly.
day.
That's correct.
And here you can see, now you couldn't do this with a stone, could you? You couldn't make it burn. So this is quite unique. Bob, how unique is this? We're hearing it obviously from Simon and Emma, but...
Well, the smell is pretty unique, I must
is it?
admit.
That's not me.
But unique in that you only find these balls, apparently, in these 5 areas where the 5 cities would have existed. Normal
God, it's a strong smell. It
It
smells
really
like
is
it is
powerful.
when you're in the Dead Sea.
Yeah,
You've got that smell, haven't you?
Yeah. And these balls are only found in this area down by the Dead Sea. Usually sulfur is found in crystal form, but nowhere can you find it like this. So that makes it very unique. Oh, it is pretty
Very
powerful,
strong.
very strong, isn't it?
And this is an
This is the
example.
first time we've ever had anything like this.
RealDiscoveries.com. Real people, real places. RealDiscoveries.com.
Have your family or friends ever told you they don't believe in the Bible? It's just a myth. Then give them this book, Our Search for Sodom and Gomorrah, an amazing investigation revealing the evidence for the skeptical mind. This book and DVD documentary gives hard data concerning the story of Genesis from the Bible. A group of skeptics traveled to the Dead Sea in Israel to see what remains of Sodom and Gomorrah. The group was speechless when confronted with the ghostly buildings that resembled fortresses, ziggurats, sphinxes, man-made streams, and wells, including tons of ash. As the group continued into the cities, they stumbled upon balls of sulfur brimstone, not in a crystalline form as you would expect, but as compressed powder. Join Simon the author as he consults scientists, geologists, archaeologists, and mineral experts. Now your family and friends can see for themselves the evidence of these incinerated biblical cities. Order now at RealDiscoveries.com or call 440-142-473-3684. Is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah true? Over 3,900 years after the events, archaeological discoveries, newly found ancient historical records, and up-to-date scientific analysis are all marrying to present hard evidence that the biblical account of Sodom and Gomorrah is stunningly accurate. Our investigations start at the Dead Sea, which is the lowest point of altitude on Earth, 417 meters below sea level, 67 kilometers long, and 18 kilometers wide. Its salt level is 6 times higher than any ocean, fish that stray into it die, and a human being will float in it without any other buoyancy aid. Since ancient Egyptian times until the present day, the area has been known for its rich minerals, which are famous for their medicinal properties. In the 1940s, the Dead Sea water level was rising, but today it is said to be evaporating at an incredible 25 centimeters a year. Although rain falls here for 7 months annually, the total is less than 50 millimeters, 2 inches a year. It was in this region that the Bible and other historical documents describe a devastating act of destruction, where several small cities were thoroughly destroyed, and their wicked activities. But not until a thorough investigation of the facts had been established. Then the Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know." There were 5 wicked cities known as the cities of the plain, cited in both secular and biblical history. Sodom and Gomorrah are 2 of these cities. Josephus states there are still the remainders of that divine fire, and the traces or shadows of the 5 cities are still to be seen. Historian Jonathan Gray reports that strangers to Sodom were enticed into the city, kidnapped, and then chained up in the square and starved to death for the amusement of the populace. In his passion for truth, businessman Simon Brown sold his enterprise and has now devoted his life into establishing the facts about Sodom and Gomorrah.
I read some astounding research. I was amazed at what was being said about Sodom and Gomorrah. Whenever I brought the subject up, my friends gave me a wide berth, and professing Christians just went quiet. Many people thought it was a money-making scheme, but no one I knew was aware of these discoveries. I decided I had to find out for myself. So I went on my own at first.
In 1975, the excavation of a royal palace in Ebla, Syria, revealed a library of 17,000 clay tablets containing historical and political records, as well as botanical and cultural information from the Middle East. They also contain many marriage and family records. The detailed information they hold allows accurate dating to be established. They are still being deciphered, but already translations have revealed accounts of the kings of the cities of the plain. One of the tablets names Bersha as the king of Gomorrah and lists the cities of the plain in total harmony with the Bible, both chronologically and geographically. Josephus also identifies 5 cities of the plain during this period of history, supporting biblical records. Where were these cities? The precise location of the cities of the plain has caused disagreement, often the case with archaeologists. Some believe they are on the eastern shores.
They're on the Jordanian side, yes.
One theory has been that the cities were submerged under the Dead Sea somewhere on the northern shores. However, Ralph E. Bainey admits in his book Search for Sodom and Gomorrah how he undertook several scuba diving expeditions in the areas where they were supposed to be and found nothing.
Yeah, well, if you accept the biblical account, there are 2 statements that challenge that location.
Before the angels started the destruction of the cities, Lot persuaded them to allow him, his wife, and his daughters to escape the city of Bela, or Zoar as it was renamed. Zoar, or El Safi as the Arabs now call it, is a short distance from the south coast of the Dead Sea. Lot couldn't have seen Zoar from the northern coast, and the Bible says it only took them a day to escape there, an impossible journey on foot in a day. Also, after the destruction of the cities, Abraham rose early and went to the place where he had previously stood before the Lord. He saw the smoke rising from the destruction. Even if Abraham hadn't gone any distance in conducting the angels from Mamre, from there, it's easy to see the plains in which Zoar, Sodom and Gomorrah were located, and to see smoke rising would be easier still.
There is another point to consider about the cities, and that's the architecture.
There are several references to Canaanite cities having high walls, or very high walls, or walls up to the sky.
I accept that Zoar and Sodom weren't geographically in Canaan, but Zoar was only a short distance from the border. Perhaps 8 kilometres, and Sodom would be even closer. The architecture isn't going to change that much in such a short distance, especially when you consider that the land character is the same. And because of the frequent wars, high fortified cities were essential. The Dead Sea may be evaporating now, but it's hard to think it's ever sunk 20 metres, which is the height of some of these walls. If these cities had been submerged, there'd be clay, lots of clay. But there's no clay, it's all ash.
During the third millennium, the conditions in that region were wetter and cooler than they are today. So the Dead Sea would have actually been higher, much higher than it is today. So that, as I say, these cities, or these archaeological sites, which are now many, many meters above the level of the Dead Sea, were at that time on its shore. So the sea is actually sunk over time. So there's no reason to suppose anything would be underneath the Dead Sea.
I believe these cities have never been submerged.
People began to think Simon had gone a little strange. Emma, his wife, was both afraid of flying and a bit scared of the Middle East situation, nor was she as convinced about this as Simon was. So, on the 25th of October 2005, Simon made his first trip alone. Arriving mid-afternoon and jet-lagged, a trip to the Dead Sea wasn't feasible that day. So, being a new Christian in the Holy Land, he took in some sights. The next day, he hired a taxi and headed for Mount Masada and the site of the city of Gomorrah. Approaching the tip of the Dead Sea, they passed high white-walled cities 35 kilometers before Masada. Simon thought they were Admah and Zeboim. Perhaps for the first time, he began to appreciate just how far the cities of the plain were spread apart, not all together as people have thought, something that was to prove very significant later. Eventually, Simon entered the city of Gomorrah. Deadly quiet, with no wind and no birds singing. A ghost town. Fear and excitement both gave way as the reality of where he stood rendered Simon totally speechless. Not a picture in a book, not a video anymore. He was there. But who would believe him? He needed proof. An urgent frenzy came over him. He recalled the documentaries he had watched and began searching for brimstone, urged on by a comment that his wife Emma had made.
You'll never doubt God again if you find some brimstone, brimstone, brimstone.
Simon dug with his bare hands for 20 minutes, but he found nothing. Exhausted, with no water or hat in the ferocious heat, he turned to leave, fruitless and disappointed, but stopped and prayed. And there it was. Brimstone, a small, chalky ball about an inch in diameter and slightly heavier than polystyrene, just the same as he had seen on his home TV screen. He took a piece of the ashen walls, packed them both carefully, and returned to the taxi. In the privacy of his hotel room, Simon wanted to prove to himself he had the genuine article. A simple test left him in no doubt, and he returned home full of excitement. Despite carrying a plastic bag with white powder in it, the wall sample was already crumbling, and a box with some strange rock balls, Simon miraculously cleared customs. At home, a reception committee was waiting for him. His wife and daughter, still a little skeptical, waited for him to reveal his finds, and like a magician, Simon produced his sulfur jewel. He ushered his audience around him and showed them the same test he had conducted in the hotel.
I was really excited that Dad was coming home from Israel because he'd phoned us up and told us about all the discoveries that he had made. And as soon as he got home, he took us into the kitchen and he took out these balls of sulfur, and as 2 or 3 seconds after he lit it, me and Mum had to run out because the fumes were so choking, and seeing those balls of sulfur helped me really believe in Sodom and Gomorrah.
It was becoming obvious that scientific analysis was needed. Discoveries made by unqualified people, no matter how reasonable or exciting they appear, aren't enough. But more samples were needed, so a second trip was planned. This time, there was a totally different level of enthusiasm.
What I brought back caused enormous interest, so I organised a group trip to the site. There were 8 of us the second time: Emma, my wife, and Alex, Einar the cameraman, Paul Huggins ex-boxer, Laurentia, Michael, and their son Brouchard.
When Simon said he wanted to go and find Sodom and Gomorrah, I think he'd gone a bit balmy, maybe reading the Bible a bit too much. I didn't go for several reasons. The first one, as I say, I wasn't too sure that it was there, and my faith really wasn't strong enough at this point. And the second thing was, obviously there's issues over in Israel at the moment, and it frightened me. I really don't like flying, so Obviously I was very anxious when he left for his safety, being left at home on my own with my daughter. But from the minute he actually left and he rang to say he was at the airport, I was very jealous. I wish that I had gone. And I felt very sad that he wasn't there, and still very anxious because of the safety factors. Simon kept ringing me up and he was telling me about all the wonderful places he was at, and he just had such a difference in his voice. He was just so happy and just so confident, and he just kept ringing up and he was telling me he was here, he was there, and it was lovely to hear him just sounding so great. Lauren and I headed off to the airport to pick Simon up, and obviously we was very excited when we saw him, but the talk was just about what Simon had done, and my daughter was just really wanted to get home and see the ball of brimstone that he'd promised to bring home. When we got home, normally all we're worried about is the presents that Simon's bought us, but not this time. We instantly wanted to see the ball of sulphur, and so Simon was just like a kid with a toy, like with candy. He was so excited to get it out. And we was just all rushed into the kitchen, and it was absolutely amazing what we saw. Me and Lauren were for the first time lost for words. It was a real magical moment. It changed my mind really. From Simon came back just a totally different man. His faith was really renewed. He had such a love. He had such a love for God, and he was just really different. And he was showing me the pictures, everything we saw, and I just wanted to be like Simon. I wanted to have that faith and that confidence that Simon had. And I decided that if I really believed in this and I really trusted, that all my fears would be put to one side and I would go.
On the 29th of February 2006, 8 people with very mixed feelings of excitement, bewilderment, and still with fears of flying and other potential dangers, boarded a flight to Israel. Questions arose. Was there more to see? Where was Sodom? Could it be seen? Wasting no time on the first day, the party headed straight for the site of Gomorrah. The midday sun brought the ghostly buildings into sharp relief as the group entered the city, making it even more dramatic than Simon recalled. The new visitors were stunned. Simon's heart was gladdened as he saw others sharing his passion at last. Just like Simon's first visit, words failed the team as they tried to grasp the reality of the moment, surrounded by thousands of tons of historical truth. Still in awe, everyone turned their attention to finding brimstone samples. But strangely, just as Simon had experienced, 20 minutes of searching proved futile. Newly inspired by what she had experienced, Emma prayed with the group. 2 minutes later, she shouted,
"Simon! Simon! Is this one? Come quick!"
A 2-inch diameter white powdery ball, which she had found under a bush, lay in her hand. Everyone gathered as the first trophy of their visit was identified. Brimstone, bigger than any that Simon had found. Filled with excitement, everyone began looking under bushes. Suddenly, it was everywhere, like strawberry picking, bigger and bigger samples. Einar asked Simon how they could be sure it was the real thing. He selected the smallest piece, placed it on a kitchen knife, and lit it. Now everyone had seen the proof for themselves. The ball burned so fiercely that it welded a shell to the knife. With renewed vigor, the hunt was resumed. While the others searched, Simon picked up another piece of rock. When he tried to light it, it didn't burn. He satisfied himself that not all the rocks in the area contained sulfur. 66 samples were collected in all that day, amongst which was one very different from the rest. Paul found a piece embedded in a wall. It resembled a peanut in a shell, with a hole at one end through which the sulfur ball could be seen clearly. Fired into the wall at a phenomenal velocity, the sphere burning at a ferocious heat had melted the wall around it, creating a brown husk before it was extinguished, starved of oxygen. A theory exists whereby some people believe the sulfur in this region is the result of volcanic activity. Other theories involving volcanoes and explosions emerged as scientists were contacted, but we will address this later. Thrilled and exhausted, the ecstatic team hardly noticed the one-hour journey back to their hotel. In Einar's room, the sulfur gems were arranged on a table. Everyone wanted to see another one burn, but care had to be taken because of the smoke alarms. Opening all the doors and windows and choosing the smallest sample, Simon placed it in an ashtray and lit it. The effect was even more startling than in the open air. It burned bright blue, which couldn't be seen in the sunlight, but in the small space, the fumes were horrific. Everyone but Simon left the room until 1 minute later, this tiny sample burned out.
I had a hidden belief in the group. Although we had the same objective of searching for Sodom and Gomorrah, but I had cynical kind of ideas by saying, yes, it did happen, but it's 300,000 ago, and how can we geographical space? What made us believe it was there? What happened as we light one of the ball? Actually, I was the first person to run out of the room by screaming, "I believe, I believe, I believe."
Can you imagine thousands of these balls all burning at once? You would definitely be choked to death and be unconscious long before the flames got to you. At dinner that night, the whole conversation revolved around their discoveries. Simon and Emma thanked God and each other for the most exciting day of their lives. The group visited many of the sites that the Holy Land has to offer. And they had a bit of fun too. With only 1 day of the trip remaining, Simon wanted to try and find Sodom and discuss the idea with the group. 6 members decided to go. Transport was found and they set off for the southern shores of the Dead Sea. About 35 kilometers past Gomorrah, they found a road sign reading, "For Mount Sodom." The party disembarked and began to scale the hill. Not being experienced mountaineers and all having different levels of fitness, they were soon separated. Paul was well ahead of Simon, whilst the others lagged behind him. The terrain and the sheer height of the mount proved to be too dangerous for untrained climbers, so the attempt was abandoned. Even the descent was hazardous, and had begun the drive back when something changed their course. A small bumpy track appeared just about wide enough for the minibus. The driver wasn't happy to take his bus on a road that really needed a 4x4, but they encouraged him to try, and mercifully he agreed. At crawling pace, they drove through what seemed like a mountain pass. The driver cheered up as the road straightened out. Suddenly, what they had come all this way to see was right in front of them. Unlike Gomorrah, which is on the open plain, this site was snuggled between two mountains. Stopping at a sign which informed them that they were now in the Judean Desert Nature Reserve, everyone alighted from the bus. Foot slogging up the uneven track, the telltale signs that Simon had become so adept at spotting were obvious to him, if not to the others at first. Having studied video and written research for months, he was convinced that he knew what he was looking at.
In Sodom, I wondered what these strange shapes once looked like. In the book, The Exodus Case, I found pictures showing typical villages in ancient Haran. The similarity is striking.
Like Gomorrah, the cream-ashen structures against the brown-colored mountains was even more marked at this level, but the architecture and layout of the city was very different. The buildings seemed to be arranged in terraces. They came to a large construction. It looked like the ruins of a fortress. The base reflected the style of buildings in Gomorrah, but part of it was topped with a stone wall. It had doors, windows, walls with mortar joints. Further on was what looked like a room, perhaps a table. This was an awesome city, preserved, so it would seem, by the effects of the heat baking the structures, so that 3,900 years later, we can see it. If he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them into ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, often built into the cliffsides, walls, doorways, wells, built of the same brickwork. This was once a well-irrigated place. Consider this reference from the Bible. Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt toward Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of Jordan, stream beds and watercourses, pebbles, water in abundance running right through the city, dams directing water sometimes under buildings, structures lining the banks of the streams, fossils, some that looked like mussels, fused together by what appears to be a great burst of heat. the constant clarity of the difference in color between the buildings and the background. Even today, Middle Eastern cities make use of cliffs and mountains to build houses into. Water sources always attract construction, especially in countries where watered areas are of great value. Man has always demonstrated his religion on high places. The Bible constantly refers to this. Ziggurats. Sphinxes. Thousands of tons of touchable, visible history. But perhaps still not enough to convince a scientific generation like the one we live in today. So, the party began to leave. Back in the UK, Simon, Emma, and Einar began the long job of evaluating what they had found at the Intertech Sunbury Technology Center. An X-ray fluorescent technician was to supervise an analysis of the brimstone samples. In order to provide a sample good enough for the precision of the X-ray fluorescent spectrometer to read, Andy had to be very thorough in his preparation. In short, Simon's brimstone samples were to be analyzed. Then the same tests would be conducted on sulfur flowers that had been chemically refined by laboratory methods. Sulfur flowers are the purest form of the element available today, being over 99% pure. The test results are then compared in order to give a benchmark or standard so that the purity of the brimstone samples can be ascertained. Beginning by hand, Andy set about crushing one of Simon's samples. Even at this stage, Andy remarked on how pure the samples Simon had provided appeared. Both the standard sulfur and the brimstone were then mixed with a binding agent, lithium carbonate. Next, it was mixed in a blender and then pressed in a machine to a compression of 40 tons. Having pulverized the samples under 40 tons of pressure, they now have to be removed from their containers. What they are left with is this. 6 samples for analysis have been prepared. 3 of the standard sulfur flowers and 3 of Simon's samples, a bit like slides for a microscope, but much more precise. Andy has achieved 2 things in his preparation. Firstly, he has produced samples that are homogenized, that is to say, of a uniform consistency over the whole surface of the preparation, so the X-ray fluorescence spectrometer will have a very even sample to look at. If only one test is done or only one concentration used, there is a greater chance that mistakes can be made. The amount of the substance they are analyzing shows up in proportions relative to the binding agent or other ingredients in the sample. Each concentration will give a result showing the percentage of the purity of the sulfur and identify the other elements in the sample. If the percentages are about the same, we can trust the results to be accurate.
I'm getting higher results
Of the sample that
Yeah.
you sent.
Nothing can be 150% of itself, can it? What was happening was difficult to grasp.
But if you're finding it actually sort of embedded in walls and things like that.
To cut them out with the walls.
Right. No.
Yeah, my husband spent an hour cutting out
Right.
one out of actual rock where it was just so embedded in the rock that you couldn't actually pull it out.
Right.
I've got a prize specimen at home. It's about the size of my fist.
Right.
And I cut it right out the rock, and I stood in the rock, left it in there, where it's come down.
Right.
And embedded itself.
Right.
It may have burnt for some time, and then.
Yes. Yeah, because the outside probably would be very hot, and therefore it would burn. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen anything like that.
Emma had questions also. Could this possibly have been volcanic activity? Mount Sodom may be a salt dome, another natural source of sulfur. However, if that were the case, a substrata of crystalline sulfur would be the kind we would discover there. Or possibly it is volcanic. But even if it is a long way from the city, too far away to have volcanic debris land on it, even less likely to be embedded in walls. And the volcano, when it erupts, chooses 5 cities separated by sometimes 30 or 40 kilometers to deposit its contents on. Volcanic debris stays local to the volcano. It doesn't jump over huge areas, leaving them untouched. And it doesn't choose the element of sulfur out of its lava to fireballs into walls at high velocity. The chances of volcanic action doing all these things is very remote. Finally, Andy came up with a test result that he could accept.
Yeah, it's a little bit lower than the standard, so I would say 93, 94% sulfur.
Perhaps the samples Simon brought were too pure for the extremes of the X-ray apparatus to read. The group visited other establishments, including the British Museum, in their quest for answers. As can be expected, there are differences of opinion.
I mean, the overall, I think what I'm saying is that the overall structure that you see here is completely natural, is a geological formation.
Basically.
Okay, that's just, that's again, it looks very odd, but it's a natural formation. And it's caused, again, it's caused by a combination of water erosion, but also wind as well. As you've probably realised, it can get very windy in that area as well. It's almost a sandblasted effect.
Jonathan suggested that an industrial accident might explain the presence of the sulfur balls.
But when undoubtedly these industries were being conducted, certainly bitumen processing was being conducted around the shores of the Dead Sea, maybe sulfur processing too. But if you have a processing industry, let's say, at a place like Babadra or Numair, one of these places on the shore of the Dead Sea, and the thing goes up in flames, then you're going to have a pretty cataclysmic destruction with sulfur balls flying all over the place.
Yes.
And so to have these things raining down is not, therefore, surprising.
Again, however, this begs the same question. How did the explosion spread the distance that it did? And why was it so selective in its choice of where it deposited its fallout? Or what is the likelihood of 5 separate locations experiencing identical disasters? There are 5 locations in the world where these sulfur balls are to be found. Nowhere else. So, drawing from all of the resources we have used, what have we discovered about this story? That in 5 distinct locations, 5 Ashen cities exist that are identified in the Syrian tablets discovered in Ebla, described by the historian Josephus in AD 75, where we find the same patterns of architecture, the same composition of ashen walls, that in each of these places, hundreds of thousands of balls of sulfur are present, which, when we have them meticulously analyzed, yield a purity level as high or possibly higher than any form of the element known to man. That it would appear there is nowhere else on the planet that such samples exist, to the point where eminent scientists and specialists who know all about their subject admit that they have never seen anything like them. That natural disasters like volcanic activity or industrial accidents fail to explain adequately the baked ash, or the hundreds of thousands of sulfur missiles burning at temperatures that cannot be calculated with modern machinery, that have been embedded in walls and sprayed around the close proximity of these 5 cities, so selectively that no trace of them exists in the terrain in between the 5 sites whatsoever, and above all, that a detailed description of the events, the locations, the substances, and the reasons why this all happened exists in the Bible that we hold in our hands today, that fits together perfectly in the minutest detail, endorsed by clay tablets as clear as the Dead Sea Scrolls' first-century historians and scientific research of the 3rd millennium. Then perhaps it's time to accept such overwhelming evidence not as a myth, but unquestionable reality. But we aren't quite finished yet. There may be one further ingredient, even more fantastic and arresting to consider. We return for a moment to Sodom, just before Simon's party left. The minibus hadn't returned. The Bible story of Lot's wife came to mind. Suddenly, looking towards the direction of Zoar, where they had been earlier that day, something caught Simon's eye. He reached for his camera and took a shot. Facing Sodom, back toward Zoar. First-century historian Josephus had this to say in his first book of the Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 11, paragraph 4, verses 22 and 23. But Lot's wife, continually turning back to view the city as she went from it, and being too nicely inquisitive what would become of it, although God had forbidden her so to do, was changed into a pillar of salt. For I have seen it, and it remains at this day. Has she,